My name is Claire Thompson, 35 years old, single mom, divorced, and if you live in Willow Creek, Missouri, a tiny town where every porch light knows every family secret people pretend not to know, those last 3 words are enough to make you the main topic over scrambled eggs and Sunday biscuits. It was Monday morning. I stood outside Jefferson Elementary, waiting for my son Ethan to get out of class. In my hand was a paper bag holding a chocolate milk box and a peanut butter sandwich cut into the shape of a heart. I do that every Monday because I know how much my son hates the start of the week. A group of moms in designer leggings with perfect loose curls walked past. I smiled. They adjusted their masks instead of smiling back. One of them, Dana Layton, leaned toward the others and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Takes guts to show up here after that divorce." Soft giggles, sharp as needles through what little dignity I had left. I turned toward Ethan as he walked out. He moved slower than usual. No bright smile, just a hesitant glance, then a quick turn away like looking at his mom might get him noticed for the wrong reasons. Is my son ashamed of me? 3 years ago, I was a technical coordinator at a software firm in St. Louis. I left my job after Ethan was born, at my husband's pleading. "I've got us covered," he said. "You just be a mom." I believed him. But when he hit his midlife crisis and started sleeping with his assistant, I became useless in our marriage and in the world beyond. After the divorce, I had no job, no support system, just a growing little boy in a world that seemed to stop believing in his mother. Silence can be crueler than any accusation. I tried to find work. The supermarket manager turned me down because I had no shift experience. The school library passed me over for someone younger and more energetic. Each rejection was a slap without sound. No one came out and said they didn't want to hire a single mom, but the way they looked at me like I came with a warning label said enough. Last week, I signed up to volunteer for a charity event at Ethan's school. I baked 80 cookies with the last bit of flour in the pantry, but when I showed up, someone gently reminded me, "We updated the list of volunteers. Sorry if you didn't get the memo." I nodded, said nothing, left the cookies on the table. As I turned to leave, I heard another whisper, "She's probably just looking for sympathy." Sad, really sad. No one asked how many meals I'd skipped to afford those ingredients. No one asked why I never go out on Friday nights. No one asked how many times I cried in the shower so Ethan wouldn't hear me. It's not sad because I'm poor. It's sad because I once believed this was a community. That night, lying beside Ethan in our tiny rented room where every passing semi made the window frame shudder, he whispered, "Mom, do people hate you?" My body went still. That question, from my child, the one I never thought I'd hear. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people just don't understand what really happened." Ethan stayed quiet, then turned away. My answer wasn't enough. I could feel it the way kids sense the truth hiding under the sugarcoat. I couldn't let my son grow up thinking his mom was a failure. The next morning, I typed into Google with shaking hands, "How to start over when you're a single mom, unemployed, and unwelcome." No search result could answer that. But I knew this much: I'd have to write my own, for me and for Ethan. Because if this town could come together to break a woman down, I sure as hell could make them question every story they thought they knew. A week later, I got a letter from Jefferson Elementary inviting me to a parent meeting. It was worded politely, but the cursive ink on the envelope for Mrs. Claire Thompson only sent a chill through me. I showed up on time. Sat in the back. What I didn't know was I had just walked into a trap. In the cramped PTA meeting room, no one greeted me. The air felt thick. At the head of the table sat Principal Caroline Dorsey, her face calm to the point of cold. On her right was the vice principal, and on her left, Dana Layton, Lululemon-clad, flawless curls, lips painted too red, eyes that judged like a silent jury. The principal opened with a low, careful voice. "Claire, we need to talk about the weekend's charity fundraiser." I nodded, heart steady but slow. Still unsure what this was about? There's $800 missing from the donation box. And the last person with access to the supply room key was you. I froze. I only helped with the cookies. I never handled any money, Dana chimed in. Her tone sugar slick. I remember Claire saying she'd lock things up because she wanted to contribute one last time. I think others remember too. I turned toward the rest of the table. No one met my eyes. A few scrolled through their phones. A couple nodded gently as if they were confirming a version of events that had never happened. I didn't take the money. I said. My voice didn't shake, but my hands were clenched tight in my lap. The principal didn't accuse me of lying. She just offered a solution. To avoid misunderstandings and preserve the school's reputation, I think it's best if Claire steps back from all parent activities until things are clarified. No charges, no formal write-up, but the verdict was already written in the silence of that room. No proof. But when people want you to be guilty, proof doesn't matter. I walked out of the school without a word. Ethan was waiting by the parking lot, kicking at a loose pebble. Why did the meeting take so long? Mom, I couldn't answer. I couldn't tell my son that his mother had just been accused of stealing from his school, that the town was more than ready to believe it, that some people seemed to need me to be the villain just to validate their own narratives. That night, I got an email from my landlord, just one short, clinical paragraph. We've received feedback regarding conduct affecting community reputation. The lease will not be renewed at the end of this month. Thank you for your understanding. They didn't say what kind of feedback. They didn't have to. The whisper campaign had already begun. In the supermarket side, glances and murmurs. At the pharmacy, people avoiding my gaze. Even the bank teller who used to smile now called me ma'am with a straight face. You don't need to be kicked out of town. They just make it so unbearable that you quietly disappear. I sat in the dim living room that night, just the hum of the old washer and the soft yellow light casting long shadows. Ethan was asleep. I stared at our budget notes lines of red ink that looked more like open wounds than numbers. I'd already pawned my wedding ring last year. There was nothing left to sell. I opened Facebook. A local mom group had posted pictures from the fundraiser. Beneath one of them was a comment from an anonymous account. Just goes to show you never really know who to trust. Not everyone who looks pitiful is actually good. I didn't need a name to know who wrote it. That kind of cowardice has a scent I know by heart. But for the first time, my body didn't shake from fear. It shook with rage. Rage at their pettiness. Rage at the silence of those who once smiled at me. Rage at myself for starting to believe maybe I deserved it. 3 nights later, Ethan and I left in silence. No goodbyes. No one waving. I found a room behind a laundromat owned by an old friend. $280 a month, no AC, shared bathroom, but at least I still had my son, and I could still breathe. I kissed Ethan's forehead as he slept. My chest felt like ice, but for the first time, I whispered something to myself I hadn't dared say before. They don't get to win. Not this time. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew this if I had to start over. It wouldn't be as the same polite, obedient Claire they remembered. I woke up earlier than usual to the distant hiss of the school bus brakes. Our rented room behind the laundromat was damp-walled, with a sagging ceiling, and that maddening drip from the shared bathroom faucet kept me up all night. But Ethan was still curled up in his thin blanket, face peaceful like all of this was just an inconvenient vacation. I made myself a cup of instant coffee using an old electric kettle I found behind the supermarket dumpster. Under the pale morning light, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hair frizzed, eyes hollowed with sleepless rings, sleeves of my sweater frayed. Claire Thompson, once a tech coordinator, now what no one had an answer. I landed a part-time job at a small sandwich shop 2 blocks away, minimum wage, lunch shifts only. The owner was a retired Marine, barked every sentence like it was an order. He hired me because someone had walked out midweek without notice. I didn't say much. I needed money, and that was enough reason to endure. My first shift, He snapped at me for cutting the bread unevenly. By the third, a customer yelled because my eyes looked condescending when in truth, I was just trying not to cry from the back pain. But I stayed, because quitting meant Ethan would eat instant noodles for another week. At night, I borrowed a battered old laptop from a student friend of the laundromat owner. He'd dropped out temporarily due to tuition debt. I started relearning everything I'd forgotten, debugging, writing simple code, brushing up on basic web development. I was slower than I used to be, but doing nothing was no longer an option. Ethan now attended a different public school, smaller, farther. I bussed him there and back daily. But something had shifted in his eyes. No more stories about class or friends. Just silence. Then one evening, as I stood at the sink scrubbing dishes in ice-cold water, Ethan asked Mom, "Did you really steal?" My hands froze, soap bubbles sliding off my fingers. I didn't look up. I just kept my voice steady. "No, I never did that." He nodded softly and turned away. But that nod wasn't belief. It was retreat, a quiet surrender to end the conversation. My own son had started to doubt me, and maybe he was ashamed of me too. I understood. He's just a kid. He hears things from classmates, from adults. At that age, truth doesn't matter as much as repetition. And what had been repeated endlessly for the past month was his mom's a thief. That night, I stepped onto the narrow balcony behind the laundromat. The wind cut through my thin sweater. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to call my ex, just to scream into the phone. I didn't fall apart, but I knew he wouldn't care. I wrapped the sleeves tighter around me and looked down at the street. Cars passed, indifferent as the stares I got every day. And then I thought about a vague idea that had been whispering in the back of my mind for weeks. What if I built a platform, a space for single moms like me, the ones pushed aside, the ones silenced? Would anyone join quietly? I opened the laptop and started a new file. The first line, typed in shaky black Arial, read MomLoop, a network for mothers society has forgotten. I had no funding, no team, not even a workspace. But I had one thing that mattered more than all of that. A reason. A reason to make sure Ethan never had to bow his head because of me. A reason so women like me didn't have to swallow shame in silence. I stared at that title, and for the first time in what felt like forever, something flickered inside me, small, but alive. The world still saw me as invisible, but if I had to scream with a keyboard and bleed through every line of code just to stay visible, then so be it. Because I still had my son, and I was not done. The world around me was asleep. Ethan curled up at the corner of the old bed, breathing in slow, even rhythms. I sat with my back against the wall, a cold cup of instant coffee beside me, the laptop warm on my lap. I was writing the first lines of code for MomLoop, driven by fear, uncertainty, and the unshakable will of a mother with nothing left to lose. I was relearning programming from scratch, teaching myself through YouTube, Stack Overflow, and any free course I could find. Every line of code I wrote was a quiet declaration I still exist. I would not let the world define me as the thief or the failed mom. I would write my own definition, letter by letter. Maybe I was losing my mind, but somewhere between the howling wind sneaking through the doorframe and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard in the still night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I built MomLoop as an anonymous forum, a place where single moms could share their stories without fear of judgment. No profile pictures, no real names, just a temporary email address. Each member could post, send private messages, share resources, affordable housing, scholarships, legal aid, survival tips, a digital shelter for the displaced and invisible. I did it all alone. Some nights I worked until dawn, eyes burning, body aching, but every time I wanted to quit, I heard Ethan's voice again. "Mom, did you steal?" And I kept going, because I knew if I succeeded, He'd understand that his mom wasn't just innocent, she created something that helped others like her stand tall again. By day, I still worked at the sandwich shop, slicing bread, wiping counters, hauling trash. The owner grew more irritated each time I asked to leave early to pick up Ethan. One day he snapped, "If you still want this job, you better remember who's keeping your lights on." I clenched my fists, said nothing. I needed the paycheck. I needed to stay calm. I needed to remember the bigger goal MomLoop has to survive. I began quietly sharing the platform on single mom Facebook groups. No ads, no fanfare. Just a whisper in the dark to others like me. If you feel like you have nowhere else to go, try this place. Anonymous. Judgment-free. Just people trying to make it like you. In the first week, 6 people joined. 1 from Montana, 2 from Texas, 3 in Florida. I read every post they wrote about abusive exes, lost custody, sleeping beside an empty fridge. Each story felt like a broken mirror, reflecting back the same pain I thought I carried alone. By the second week, 50 more, then 200, then 600. No one knew Claire Thompson was behind MomLoop, the single mom shunned by her entire town. And I didn't want them to know. Not out of shame, but because I was learning something new. Real strength lives in quiet persistence when the world pretends you're not there. One night, I got a message from an anonymous user I was going to end my life last week, but MomLoop stopped me. "Thank you, whoever you are." I didn't reply right away. I cried. Not the kind of sobs I used to choke back after being humiliated, but real tears for the first time in months because I had finally changed something. I bought a small whiteboard and stuck it to the wall with cheap adhesive. Every morning, I wrote 3 words, "Don't quit, Claire." Not for anyone else to see, just for me, to remind myself that maybe I was never a shadow. Maybe I was becoming a small light for those still lost in the dark. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need that town's approval. I needed one thing for Ethan to be proud when he said the word mom, and I believed if I held on long enough, that day would come. I don't know who first figured out that I was behind MomLoop. Maybe it was a nosy parent or someone from Ethan's old school who went digging through my college Facebook and eventually stumbled onto my GitHub where I'd forgotten to delete the platform's logo. But I know exactly when it hit. That morning, while stacking cold-cut sandwiches in the fridge at work, I got an email titled, "Exposed Single Mom Who Stole from School, Now Profiting Off Pity." It was an anonymous blog post, published on some trashy local gossip site. The author implied I'd weaponized my victimhood to raise sympathy donations, claiming MomLoop was nothing more than a PR stunt for personal gain. They posted screenshots of me sharing my story on a programming forum. They stitched together out-of-context user comments to build a fake narrative. Worst of all, they pulled photos of Ethan from an old private account and used them as part of this so-called sob campaign. I dry-heaved right there on the tiled floor, from fear, from rage, but mostly from the crushing realization that I no longer had the power to protect my child from the world. The next day, I got an email from the crowdfunding site hosting our campaign. They froze our page and demanded proof that MomLoop was a registered nonprofit and documentation verifying financial transparency. I called. I pleaded. I begged them to actually look at the content, the lives it touched, but my words vanished like breath in a snowstorm. They didn't care about truth. They wanted peace and plausible deniability. That evening, Ethan came home early, pale-faced, shaking, holding a crumpled sheet of paper. Someone taped this to my classroom door. It was a printout of that same exposed article, scribbled in red ink across the top. "Your mom is garbage." I had never seen Ethan cry like that. He screamed, punched the wall, knocked over everything in his path not from pain, but from humiliation, from the unbearable weight of shame. Why can't you just let me have a normal life? Why won't you just shut up? Why can't you just give up? I wanted to hug him, but I couldn't move. My arms wouldn't lift. It felt like a piece of my heart had cracked off and died. I used to fear being abandoned by this town, but nothing compared to being abandoned by your own child's faith in you. That night, I shut my laptop, logged out of everything, ignored the flood of messages from hundreds of MomLoop users wondering why the site was down. I curled up on the floor, blank, hollow, my chest tight. I thought about vanishing. For real. Walking out, leaving everything behind. Let them talk. Let them forget. But something inside me stirred. A flicker. I opened my inbox again. There were hundreds of messages, but one stood out. If you stop, I will too. I need you to exist. Sent by Ellie's mom. Living in a van in Maine. Daughter, age 7. I stared at that line. Then I typed into Google how to register a nonprofit organization in Missouri. I read every step, every regulation. I would start over. This time with legal documents, a tax ID, formal structure, not as someone begging for mercy, but as the founder of a platform strong enough to rattle the system. Let them try to bury me again. I'd rise, because I was no longer just Claire Thompson. I was MomLoop. I was every woman who'd been silenced, pushed aside, ignored, still breathing, still standing, waiting for someone crazy enough not to quit. Later that night, as I typed up the first version of our bylaws, Ethan walked past without a word, but just before bed, he slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. I opened it. Scrawled in messy handwriting were 2 words, "I'm sorry." I laid my head on the desk. Tears hit the keyboard. But this time, they weren't from defeat. They were the tears of a mother who finally knew without a doubt what she was fighting for. 3 years after being pushed out of my own child's school, I returned to Willow Creek, but not as the single mom who used to keep her head down at the school gate. Not as the woman who once trembled under the weight of whispered accusations in a town full of moral masks. Today, I returned as the keynote speaker for the Women in Tech Midwest conference hosted in the very town hall where no one once wanted to share a lunch table with me. The rented black SUV rolled down familiar streets. I passed the sandwich shop where I once scrubbed countertops, the library that wouldn't hire me, the rusted roof duplex whose landlord evicted me without a thank you. Every block, every corner, a scar. But today, I walked through them in black heels and a charcoal blazer dress, hair neatly pinned up, and a name tag that read, Claire Thompson, founder and CEO, MomLoop. Inside the grand hall, I spotted familiar faces. Dana Layton, 3rd row, in a body-hugging Calvin Klein dress, lips tight, eyes frozen the moment she saw me. Principal Dorsey, now retired, standing at the welcome desk with an invitation card in hand, likely unaware I was the featured speaker today. I didn't greet them. No nod, no acknowledgement. I walked past like they'd never existed in the version of my story I was now rewriting. When I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight hit me dead on. I didn't have to look down to know people were whispering. That's Claire. She's really a CEO now. I thought she disappeared. I opened with one simple sentence. 3 years ago, an entire town labeled me a thief. Today, I've come back to say this. You were right. I did steal something, but it wasn't money. It was the belief that I would stay a victim. The room went silent. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. I continued. They thought I'd leave this town for good, and I did. But I didn't run. I built a community. A platform. A voice for those no one else wanted to hear. I spoke about the nights I washed dishes until my hands bled, teaching myself to code while feeding my son instant noodles. About how MomLoop started with just 6 users, and how today it serves over 130,000 women across the country. I didn't name names. Not once. But every gaze in that audience knew who they were. Their silence now said more than their accusations ever did. I didn't need to shame them. Standing there was already the loudest answer I could give. When I finished, I received the longest standing ovation of my life. People who had never heard my name, investors, journalists, entrepreneurs lined up to shake my hand, snap photos, schedule interviews. I stepped off stage and into the private green room. As the door shut behind me, I glanced at my phone. 3 messages from Ethan. I watched the live stream. My friends don't believe my mom made MomLoop. I'm so proud. I smiled. Not the tight, practiced kind I used to wear, but the real kind. The kind that rises when you've stood up after being trampled for years, and you know you'll never bow again. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. I opened the door. "Dana Layton." "Claire," she said, voice tentative, like she wasn't sure how to pronounce it anymore. "I just wanted to say, you did good." I looked her straight in the eye. No anger, no bitterness, just a calm reply. "Thank you. Have a good day. Dana." And I closed the door, leaving the past outside like a stranger no longer welcome in the story I was still writing. I didn't need their forgiveness, because I had already freed myself. 1 week after the conference, I received an email from a familiar address, Ms. Dorsey. In it, the former principal, the same woman who once shut me out of the school parent community, wrote that my speech had made her rethink how she used to treat people. She apologized, said she was just trying to keep the peace back then. I read it 3 times and didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed to be soothed. I didn't need them circling back with explanations. Not one of them had stood up for me when I was on the ground, so now I didn't need them lowering their heads to clear my name. I wasn't seeking justice in belated words. I chose justice in action. After the conference, MomLoop was featured in Forbes Women, TechCrunch, and People. A media company reached out with plans to develop a documentary. A venture capital group in San Francisco offered $2.5 million to help expand the platform into Canada. I turned them down. Because MomLoop wasn't built for profit, I officially transitioned the platform into a nonprofit. Its board composed entirely of women who had once lived in cars, fled domestic violence, or been abandoned by the very systems meant to protect them. They didn't have Ivy League degrees, but they understood pain, and that was the only qualification that mattered. One morning, I opened applications for a content manager role among hundreds of names. One made my hands pause. Dana Layton, below, in her cover letter. She wrote, "I once looked at you the wrong way. Now I'm asking for a chance to help others see women like you the right way." I sat still for a long time, unsure what to feel. Then I opened a reply. "Dana, you can begin as a volunteer for 3 months. We don't need apologies. We need action." "Claire, I didn't do it to prove anything to her. I did it for me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but holding on to resentment is just another way of letting those who hurt you keep living inside your mind." And I was done renting them space there. That October, I was invited to speak at Jefferson Elementary, the very school that once removed me from the parent list over an imaginary crime. This time, they asked me to share insights on using tech to build sustainable communities. I stood on that small auditorium stage, the same one I used to dread entering, and in the sea of young faces, I saw Ethan, now nearly a head taller than me, sitting with confidence like he'd never known what it was to be looked down on. I told the kids one day, the person sitting next to you might be the one you laugh at, or the one you beg for help when life knocks you down. So start now. Treat each other like you both might be the ones who change the world. When I stepped off the stage, Ethan was waiting at the end of the hallway. He hugged me tight, right there in front of his friends. I told my class, "You're a CEO." I laughed. I don't need to be a CEO. Being your mom is more than enough. In that moment, I thought about every night huddled behind a laundromat, every dinner of noodles and soy sauce, every day I believed I was just a shadow. And now, whenever they speak my name, they'll say Claire Thompson, the single mom cast out by her town, who built a 130,000-woman movement and a world that refuses to stay silent. I didn't get revenge by hurting them. I got revenge by coming back to life stronger, louder, and no longer needing them. I stepped into the light, no bowed head, no guiding hand, just me, and the belief that no one gets to define you except you.